Welcome to HudCoRadio. I'm Jim Kennelly. Recently, County Executive Craig Guy and members of the Board of Commissioners joined administration staff and members of the construction management team for a tour of Hudson County's new FrankJ Guarini Justice Complex, located right across Newark Avenue from the current county courthouse in Jersey City. The host of that tour and the county executive's point person overseeing construction of the massive project is Deputy County Administrator Dave Drummeler. He joins us to talk about the project. So, Dave, I thought if we could begin first by talking about the existing structure, the one that has served as the county courthouse for many decades. So, talk, if you could, a little bit about 595 Newark Avenue, the county administration building first.
Sure, Jim, and I think that makes sense because we can't talk about the new courthouse until we talk about the old one.
Yeah.
So, we have to go way back in history when we look at the present 595 courthouse. As everybody looks at it, you see the administration building, and those are important things, as you'll see when I go through the history of the building. The building was originally built as a 5-story building. It actually, unbelievably to many people these days, it won a couple architectural awards. And
here we thought the standards in the 40s and 50s were higher.
But when it was a 5-story Art Deco building, it was actually looked like it was in perspective and things like that. So they built the building to house county offices. Basically places where I work, like the administrator's office, the county exec's office, financial offices, those things. So the building was built a 5-story building to handle that. As they were opening the building, they realized that the Brennan Courthouse at the time, which was the courthouse, the county was outgrowing. So they put another 4 stories on top of the constructed building, and that started a lot of the problems with the building because it was never designed to be a 9-story building. It was designed to be a 5-story building. So they put the extra stories on, and then they retrofitted the entire courthouse to turn it into, the entire administration building, I should say, to turn it into a courthouse. So that's why if you go over there now, you'll see a lot of the courtrooms, they have columns in the middle of the galleries, and the sight lines are terrible. It was a retrofitted space that wasn't designed that way. And for folks that have been in there, unfortunately, now you can definitely see that while we've improved some of the bullpen areas for defendants when they're coming to court, if they're getting walked because there's a trial or something where inmates that are incarcerated need to go into court, unfortunately, we have to close down hallways, escort the inmate into the courtroom, and then open the hallway back up.
So essentially you have common hallways for both normal traffic and also when you have to move an individual who's facing a court case.
Well, yes, and it's not only a dual-use hallway. It's in new courthouses it would be a tri-use hallway because, you should have separate circulation patterns for judges and court staff. We see everything that's been happening in the news lately, and that's reason for it. We should have separate hallways and elevators and things like that for inmates or defendants that are coming to court. We should also have separate hallways for the public. So all 3 of those user groups should never mix. And unfortunately in that building, they do. And there's no way around that because, as I said, even though that wasn't the way courthouses were generally built in the 40s and 50s, it was a retrofit, and that's what we're stuck with.
Let me ask you a little bit about just sort of also basic amenities. Like one of the things I always found strange is when I was a young reporter was a building that had various box air conditioner units in the walls and things like that. Was it that the higher floors didn't have that was the thing I noticed, and I've always wondered as someone involved in government how that worked.
The issue with the HVAC system in that building is it has central air. But when you look at the back of the building, you'll see at the top of the 5th floor, you'll see a bunch of grates on the back of the building. And that's where the HVAC units were originally on the roof. And they're now inside, an area on the 5th floor that vents out. And then the floors above that from 6 through 9 are all, those units are on what is basically the top floor of that building. And unfortunately, it just never worked. It was a retrofit, and it just never worked. So the only way around that, without completely doing the HVAC system in that building, which is prohibitively expensive, because think about when that building was built.
Right.
Unfortunately, it was built with asbestos-lined pipes and things like that. Now, we've mitigated all of the friable asbestos, so there's no health risk to folks there. But anytime you do work on the building, you have to call in an asbestos company, make sure everything's encapsulated in any work we do. So to redo the HVAC system, that would be prohibitively expensive. And the only way around that to really cool the place down was to put window units in and unfortunately make it look like somewhat like a Motel 6 from the outside.
I hate to say, but that was sort of the nickname in the 90s for it when I was reporting.
And it's unfortunate, but there's really no economical way around it. And that was the most economical way, was to redo the glass panels and put window units in. So that supplements the air conditioning there. Now, still, I'm not going to pretend that it's anywhere near what it should be for a building with that gravitas and with the important things that happen in that building.
Well, I want to ask you one thing about that, Dave. One of the things that really seems to be kind of the line of demarcation is kind of the post 9/11 environment, and that being that modern courthouses, certainly the models that were used when you were developing the process for this building's replacement, I mean, they look like tanks. I mean, they are massive structures. And by comparison, the county administration building serving as a criminal courthouse doesn't have that kind of physical profile. I mean, I guess that had to be something of a consideration when the planning was done for this, that whatever was going to be built was going to have to be more robust because of the current structure being what you said, a retrofit.
And you're exactly right. And not only was it 9/11, 9/11 kind of enforced it, but what really made these safety and security things at the courthouse was Timothy McVeigh. I don't know if you remember him.
Oklahoma bomber, 1995.
The Oklahoma federal courthouse by pulling up basically a U-Haul truck full of explosives. So we'll get into the design of the new courthouse later, but yes, the level of blast protection for that courthouse is not up to modern standards because obviously Timothy McVeigh wasn't even born when that courthouse was built. And it's it's a sad commentary on what we have to plan for, but we have to plan for it, and we want to make sure the users of the courthouse, the judges, the litigants, and the general public and jurors that are coming there are safe and feel safe and secure.
So now let's kind of turn our attention to the Frank Guarini Justice Complex, which is the successor to the 595 Newark Avenue County Administration Building. Talk a little bit about that building, the process of its construction, kind of what the envelope is, the whole works. If someone wanted to know what are we getting as taxpayers, what is the Guarini building going to be like?
Well, as a resident and a taxpayer, I think we're getting quite a bit for actually what we've built. We're very fortunate. The old courthouse, we knew, there were reports back in the 80s that this courthouse is very long in the tooth, and in the 90s it's not living up to the federal the standards for courthouses, and we've got to do something. So luckily the finance team put a plan together. We bond for buildings that we build, and much like your house, we bond, and it's basically like taking out a mortgage for a building. You take out a mortgage for a house, after 30 years, you end up paying it off, and you don't have that payment to make anymore. So the finance team did a wonderful job of figuring out how debt service was falling off and things like that. They had to build a jail in the 90s. That was a big one that fell off. So they came up with a financial plan where we could basically keep our debt service relatively flat and also afford to build a courthouse that, unfortunately, because of today's costs hundreds of millions of dollars.
Well, let's talk about that building then. So the Guarini building, Guarini complex. Give folks an idea of how big it is, kind of what its capacity is, what its responsibilities will be. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, we started the project of thinking about how we're going to build it and hiring the professionals and things like that back in 2017. It's been a long time coming, and I'm not sure what I'm going to do with my free time once we get done. But nonetheless, we started the process by doing basically a study using some court experts and National Institutes of Courts, and reviewing the demographics of Hudson County, the caseloads presently in Hudson County, how Hudson County looked now and how it was going to look into 2038. We wanted to do basically a 20-year study of what the needs of this county would be from a court user standpoint. So we started with engaging in that exercise and basically came up with a plan and what the architects call a program to figure out how big the building needs to be, how many judges need to be there, files and things like that. What would be the split between family courts and criminal courts and things like that. So we came up with a study, we figured it out, and then we took that study and did what they call a blocking exercise, where we basically took blocks and said, we need this much space for criminal courts, we need this much space for family courts, we need this much space for staff, blah, 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 the whole 9 yards. And that started to frame what the building would look like. So the building ended up being not terribly much bigger than the present building that we're in. It's probably about 5,000 square feet bigger in usable area. But
how large is about the total size of
it's
the new building?
406,000 square feet.
Wow.
The old building is about 401,000 square feet.
But that's a 9-story building, and Guarini is how big in terms of total stories?
Guarini it's a 5-story building,
Right.
But the first couple of floors are 2 floors high, so that we get the height that we need inside courtrooms for the judge to sit up on the bench and things like that. We don't want him bumping his head as he gets up on the bench or she gets up on the bench. So really, where that takes us to is a building that, even though it's not that much bigger, because it's functionally, I don't want to say perfect, but it's as functionally ideal as we could make it. We don't have all these odd, posts in the middle of courtrooms. We don't have offices which are set up like railroad offices where, somebody working in the back office has to go through the front 2 offices to get there. Every space is designed for its particular use.
It's built from the ground up as a courthouse.
Right. And it's built that we should be able to expand at least 2038 and beyond. And also it's built quite uniquely that if 50 years from now there's a giant change in the way courts operate, it's basically space like loft space. So you could gut the inside of it and redo the inside of it to any way you need it and any way you need to set it up, because it's all column-free space. One
thing that I thought was interesting, we did a tour recently of the new building, and that is that the layout on the first floors is very kind of constituent, customer-friendly. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how the layout of the design is one so that kind of makes it easier for folks to kind of access the building if they're an average person, an average citizen.
Well, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying to make the building for folks that are just there to do, pay something to the courts, to go to probation, to report to parole, to stop by and see the surrogate. Another high-intense use is landlord-tenant court, small claims court, and CJP court, first appearance court. So all of those are on the first floor, and the goal being for all those high-use areas to keep those folks from having to matriculate through the entire building. So basically the public spaces are floors 1, 2, and 3. The basement is where defendants are held, before they go to court, and floors 4 and 5 are for court back office staff and the prosecutor's office. So those 2 floors are not public spaces. But yes, most of the people that need to use the courts, and jury assembly is also down there, so most of the people using the courts should probably just be on the first floor, unless you want to go see a criminal trial or you have a reason like an adoption or a divorce or something like that where you go to the family court floors. Most of the folks are going to be on the first floor. We also did some unique things in the building. Elevators are very expensive, so we have ramps that take you from floor to floor, and they'll move a lot of easily with very little maintenance costs. And actually the view you get as you go up them is quite stunning. One of the things you'll see when you go up them, we have the largest public installation of a green roof in the state. We have almost 1/3 of an acre of greenery, on the roof that's over top the first floor, and you get a good view of that when you go up the ramps. And we've got all those things, the green roof. There's a bunch of chargers in the charging port. As you walk around the building, you'll see a large number of bike racks. The building is highly energy efficient. It's going to be LEED Gold certified. It'll be the only court in New Jersey that's LEED Gold certified. So that will help us save some money on the back end for energy costs and things like that. Plus, in this day and age, it's the right thing to do. We're always talking about global warming and things like that. So, this will hopefully help that. We have a large water retention basin under the ground, so we're not releasing all the water that comes off the building into the storm sewer, which is a combined sewer, unfortunately, here in Jersey City. And, all those things hopefully help to contribute to make us, A, better neighbors, and B, just a more environmentally friendly building. Everything there is pretty much state of the art as far as court tech goes. We've had sound engineers in to lay out the entire courthouse, the courtrooms. So when you're in the gallery, the sound gets sucked out by both the ceiling and the walls, so that you're not interrupting what's going on in front of the gallery, with the judge and the lawyers and whoever else happens to be in there. And then we have the opposite effect over the judge's bench, where his voice will, or her voice will project, quite easily. You can talk pretty much like we're talking here, and the judge can be heard throughout the whole courtroom, just because of the way it's laid out to project his or her voice.
Now, this building, obviously, if anybody has the opportunity to see it, it's quite remarkable. If you walk past it, it's nothing like either Brennan or 595 Newark. One thing, though, is you built it in what I would think would be something of a challenging location, in that even though it's just across the street on Newark Avenue from 595, it extends out over some very unusual territory to have to build a very large structure and a parking garage. So just what were sort of the challenges for building this building in terms of the location, where it is, and what it's on top of?
Well, there were several, and none of them were fun. But the first is, we're here on top of the hill. And the reason we're on a hill is it's all blue rock underneath us, which is some of the hardest rock, we have here in New Jersey. So to put the basement in, some of the rock started at 5 feet below the surface. So we had to... we actually redesigned the building initially when we found out how much rock was there to minimize going deep. But we had to get rid of a lot of rock still, even despite the redesign. And on top of that, when you go to the back end of the building, while the parking garage structure is a relatively simple structure from what you can see, it was made actually in Denver, Pennsylvania, and shipped here because it was all done precast. But what it's sitting on is pretty incredible feat of engineering. There are two tunnels. One, a Conrail tunnel that was built prior to the Civil War that's about 50 feet deep, and it's cut through the rock. I can't imagine doing that pre-Civil War, cutting through that much hard rock. We had a hard enough time with the modern equipment that we have now. And then there is what they call a cut and cover tunnel that's a New Jersey Transit tunnel. And the Bergen Arches is what it's more commonly known as. So we basically had to put all the footings in between those two tunnels. Now, we had about 6 feet of clearance on all the way around all the way around our footings, but we had all of our engineers and architects. They were used to building in New York City, where they said 6 feet. They're never used to having that much. A lot of times 18 inches is the most they have. So to them, it was less of a structure, less of a challenge. But when you saw the ironworkers, there's a lot of union work on that building. It's all union work, actually. But when you saw the ironworkers standing in these structures that they were building out of rebar and concrete, and you had these big burly ironworkers walking through the middle of it, it was just incredible to see how we could engineer that. And it was one of the most, it was one of our most concerning parts of the project. Once we got through there, we knew that the rest would be, I don't want to say easy, but
more
less
conventional.
challenging.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So you mentioned that union labor. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about two things related to the labor on this project. One, first, how much of it and how many were union workers on this project? And two, I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the county's efforts regarding what are called XBEs. And these are minority women and veteran-owned businesses, small businesses that had the opportunity to take part as contractors on the project. So maybe flesh out both those points if you could a little bit.
Sure. And it's something that we're very proud of, and I know the county executive is very proud of. We were able to build this building, at a lot of, when we were in the height of construction, we had over 400 union employees working there every day. You'd go in and you'd have to have your head on a swivel, with your hard hat on, because there was just so much activity going on there, which was all union, and it was truly amazing. And the second thing that we're proud about is the amount of XBE work we got into this project. Our goal was to get about $92.8 million worth of XBE contracts to disadvantaged firms, minority, women, veterans, those types of firms, and we were able to get, probably when we're all said and done, somewhere around $112 million worth of work to those firms, which is far exceeded what we were expecting. And the project is beautiful, and it goes to show, that county XBEs, MBEs, can really step up and perform well, and no one should have any hesitation about hiring a lot of these county folks to really, do work on their projects, and it can be done.
I mean, correct me, I'm not sure the exact top end number, but I think the project, the Guarini building is about 350. What is the project cost? That number, the 112 is based on?
The construct. It's based on the construction cost,
right?
Which
so what is the cost?
We're probably going to be around $325 million.
So almost a third, or around a third, over a third of these dollars, in terms of contractors, went to XBEs.
Right. Yeah, our goal was to try to get a little over 20%, and we ended up having a third of a little over a third of the building being done that way. And and again, it's a stat that I know the county executive's proud of. Norman at the HCIA is very proud of. I'm proud of. Terminal Construction's proud of as well.
What is sort of the action plan for the Guarini building? What will be the transition and all?
Well, we're going to be done with probably all of our punch lists and things like that, and having our IT stuff done probably in the next couple of weeks. So what's really going to be needing to get done is the courts finalizing their IT stuff. Once the courts have their IT stuff done, they'll be ready to move in. So they're trying to get some timelines on that, so I don't have a good timeline for that right now, but they have a couple months of work to do on that. But we're going to be done, the county will be done there. And then the courts moving in will, tip a lot of dominoes because, there's no sense in having the sheriffs over there with any serious presence. They have a couple of folks there for presence just to keep the building safe and make sure nobody's getting into the building that shouldn't and things like that. But, we don't need we don't need to bring defendants from the jail over to the Guarini when there's no courts going on. So they're still getting moved over to 595. So as soon as the courts, the courts will have their keys at the end of the year. And as soon as they're done with their IT stuff, we'd expect them to start moving in. I'd expect them to start, on a trial basis with trying out a family court and a criminal court, seeing how that works, figuring out what bugs are in there for a week or two, and then slowly keep moving judges over because, we have to keep, especially for criminal courts, because you have a fundamental right of a speedy trial. So we have to keep the criminal courts open.
You can't have any kind of interruption because you get into a new building and suddenly somebody realizes there's an IT issue or something like that. Exactly. There has to be some overlap. Sure, that makes sense. But I guess the answer really ultimately is that 2025 is the year of transition.
Absolutely.
That would be correct?
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's now talk about what will happen to the empty 595 building. There's about, I guess it's a multi-acre site, but it's a building that you mentioned has asbestos inside it. There's certainly the city has an interest in what's going there, and I know there's been, discussions in partnership with the county and city. So talk to me a little bit, if you could, about what happens to the 595 site once the Guarini complex is fully the home to the courts, the prosecutors, sheriffs, and all the rest. Well,
and it's going to be super interesting and fantastic for the neighborhood. We've entered into a partnership with Jersey City. Jersey City wanted to make the entire site where the present courthouse is a park. We, as it stands, the parking lot that you see in between the Brennan Courthouse and 595, that needs to be converted back into a grassy area pursuant to the historic trust, because that's a historic building and that was always grass. So that made a perfect way to incorporate that grass into a passive park. Under 595, a lot of people don't know this, there's a parking garage. So I'm in the process of working out how to save that parking garage because we have a lot of county staff that park at the corner of Central Avenue and Pavonia that work in the Pavonia building. So we have to find a place for them to park since that's going to be turned into the park. So the way we agreed with Jersey City is we're going to continue to keep the underground parking, assuming we can feasibly do that, and they're going to build a park on top of it, and they've had a lot of community meetings and things like that. So they're going to raise the building, and when they do demolish it, do it in a way to keep all this. They'll have to abate the asbestos first, and then pull the building down. They're going to build the park, and then they're basically going to turn the park over to the county to maintain. So we as the county will be here. It'll be another park basically in the system to be maintained by county staff, and we already do a great job of maintaining our parks, and it'll be much like when you go to Lincoln Park or Laurel Hill Park. It'll be another place, except it'll be here in the middle of Jersey City, roughly 3 acres for folks to walk around on, sit and enjoy some open space. I believe a couple of their proposed designs had a small, playground for young kids. So it'll be really great. There's not a lot of area for open space here in the middle of Journal Square. And, I think between the city building us and us taking care of it, I think it's going to be a great partnership for decades to come.
Well, Dave Drummeler, Deputy County Administrator, thank you so much for spending some time to explain all this to us.
Sure thing, Jim. Anytime.
You can learn more about the construction of the Guarini Justice Complex, including a peek inside the building, by watching the latest HudCo TV news clip about it on our YouTube channel, HudCo TV. To keep up to date on county government news and alerts, be sure to follow us on Twitter X at HudCo Tweet and on Facebook at HudCo FB. To see photos and videos of county government events, Follow us on Instagram at HudCoInsta and subscribe to HudCo TV. You can find HudCoRadio wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks as always to Hudson County Executive Craig Guy and the Board of County Commissioners, who sponsor, support, and direct all the programs and services discussed on this podcast. Take care.